I had not heard my daughter's voice in a full year when I found myself standing on her front step with a warm peach cobbler in my hands and my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. And I remember telling myself to breathe, to smile, to believe that maybe tonight things would finally be different. That maybe this dinner invitation really meant she wanted her mother back. I smoothed the blue blouse she once said made me look soft and kind. Rang the doorbell, and tried to push down the ache of all the holidays and birthdays she had skipped, all the messages she never answered, all the nights I sat alone, wondering what I had done that was so terrible I deserved silence. When the door opened, it was not her face I saw but Maria, the maid with the tired, gentle eyes, and before I could even say hello, she stepped outside, pulled the door quietly closed behind her, and grabbed my wrist with a grip that did not match her small frame. Her voice came out as a rough whisper, shaking at the edges as if every word cost her something. She said, "Please, do not go in, not tonight. Turn around and leave right now." For a moment I just stared at her, the heat from the cobbler dish burning into my palms, my mind trying to catch up, because what could possibly be so wrong inside my own daughter's home that I was being warned away from it like a stranger at the wrong address? I asked her what was happening, if my daughter was sick, if there was some kind of danger, and she only shook her head, eyes shining with fear, and told me to get in my car, to drive down the street, and if I needed to see for myself, to watch from a distance but not to be standing at that door when it opened again. Something in the way her fingers trembled against my skin told me this was not drama or exaggeration. This was a warning, and so with my cheeks burning and my chest tight with shame and confusion, I turned around, walked back down the path as calmly as I could, climbed into my old car, and drove to the corner where I could still see the house. I sat there with the cobbler cooling beside me and my hands gripping the steering wheel. And as the minutes crawled by, I realized that whatever was about to happen behind that front door was never meant for my eyes. And yet 5 minutes later, I would see it anyway, and nothing in my life would ever feel the same again. Thank you for staying with me and listening to my story. It means more to me than you know. And before I go on, I would love it if you could tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I truly enjoy knowing the places these words reach and the hearts that sit with me for a while. My name is Ruth. I live in a small town in Maine where the winters are long, the summers are gentle, and most people know each other by the sound of their car in the driveway before they ever see a face. I have spent most of my life here, watching the seasons spin past my window, raising my daughter, working, cooking, doing laundry late at night, and praying that somehow she would have a life easier than mine. I am not anyone special in the way the world counts importance. I did not become rich or powerful. I do not have any grand titles. I was a mother who worked long hours, who packed school lunches, who sat up late with a cup of coffee and a stack of bills, telling herself that if she kept going just a little bit longer, then her daughter would not have to struggle the way she did. I remember walking to work in the cold with my shoes soaked through, because I wanted to save enough to buy her a proper winter coat. I remember saying no to things for myself so I could say yes to every school trip and every club fee. I remember her small hand in mine at the grocery store when she would look up at me and say that one day she would buy me a big house and I would never have to worry about anything again. The truth is that when you pour that much of your life into someone, when you stand behind them at graduations, move them into their first apartments, co-sign their first cards because your credit is good and theirs is new, your heart starts to believe that the love between you is unbreakable. That even if you fight, even if there are hard words, there is a line they will never cross, a line you cannot even imagine them approaching. That is why sitting in that car outside her house, a year after she told me I was too much for her life, with the peach cobbler cooling beside me, and the warning from Maria still ringing in my ears, hurt in a way I find hard to explain. Because I was not just afraid of what might be happening inside that house, I was afraid of what it said about the girl I had raised, about the years I had given, about whether all those nights in Maine when I thought I was building a strong bond had somehow turned into something I did not recognize at all. When I sit here now and think back on how everything started between me and my daughter, it still feels unreal that it could come to the point where I was afraid of what might be waiting for me inside her own house. Because for so many years, my whole world was built around her smile and her future. And every choice I made felt like it had her name written on it. I was not given an easy road in this life. Her father left when she was still so small. She was sleeping in a crib pushed up against my bed. And I remember standing in the doorway after he walked out with his suitcase, looking at that little face and promising her out loud that she would never feel abandoned. That I would be there for every scraped knee, every school play, every broken heart. I worked jobs that were not pretty. I cleaned offices after other people went home. I stood behind counters on tired feet until my legs ached so badly at night that I would soak them in hot water and hope I could walk without limping the next morning. But every time she came home, waving a paper with a good grade or talking about a dream she had for her life, I felt like it was all worth it. As she grew older, I watched her become smart and confident, the kind of person who walked into a room and lit it up, and when she got into college, I cried all the way home after dropping her off. Then went straight to the bank to see what I could move around so her books would be paid for, and she would have a little food money, because I was determined that she would never feel like she had to give up on a dream because of a bill with my name on it. Over the years, her life moved forward, and mine stayed simple. A small place in Maine, filled with secondhand furniture and old photos on the wall. While hers slowly filled with new furniture, new clothes, new vacations, and whenever she asked me to help her by signing something, a lease, a car note, anything that needed a reliable name, I did it with hardly a second thought. Because in my mind it was just a mother, standing behind her daughter, helping her plant her feet in a world that can be very hard on young women trying to climb. I never imagined that my willingness to trust, my habit of signing where she pointed, would one day become the thin line between my safety and my ruin, or that the same hands I held when she learned to cross the street would later be the ones holding documents that could have quietly taken everything I had worked my whole life to keep. So as I sat in that car outside her house, the cool Maine air slipping in through the cracked window, watching the lights in her living room, and remembering the days when I used to be welcome inside without question, it felt like my heart was being pulled in two directions at once. One part still seeing the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest and whisper that she loved me more than anyone, and the other part hearing Maria's shaking voice warning me to leave, wondering what kind of woman my daughter had become, while I was busy believing nothing between us could ever truly break. The first cracks between us did not appear overnight. They slipped in quietly after she started building her own life. And for a long time, I told myself it was just normal distance, the kind that comes when someone is busy with work and trying to make something of themselves. But looking back, I can see how slowly and surely she began to move me from the center of her life to the outer edge. When she met the man who would become her husband, I tried my best to welcome him. I cooked for them, listened to his stories, laughed at the jokes that made my skin crawl a little. And even when I heard him make comments about older people not understanding money, or how some mothers did not know when to let go, I swallowed my hurt, because I did not want to be the reason anything went wrong for her. As time passed, their home grew bigger. The cars in the driveway got nicer. The vacations got farther away, and my visits got shorter and further apart. Phone calls turned into quick messages, then into silence. And when I did hear from her, it was often because something needed my name or my credit, never because she simply wanted to hear my voice and ask how I was sleeping or if my back was hurting again. The night everything finally broke was not loud at first. It started with me asking a simple question about a letter I had received from a bank I did not use, and instead of concern, she snapped at me, her eyes flashing the way they used to when she was a teenager. Only now there was a hardness in her face that I did not recognize. She told me I was being dramatic, that I saw problems where there were none, that I needed to stop accusing her and her husband of things just because I did not understand the modern world. When I tried to explain that I was only scared that some of the letters used my name in ways that did not make sense, she raised her voice and told me I was toxic, that every conversation with me turned into guilt and worry, that she needed space from what she called my negativity. And before I could gather my thoughts enough to answer, she ended the call and disappeared from my days as if someone had turned off a light. I spent that year replaying every word, every moment, wondering where I had gone wrong. Writing messages I never sent, checking my phone on birthdays and holidays, convincing myself that if she ever reached out, I would put my hurt in my pocket and just be grateful she wanted me again. And that is exactly why, when that invitation to dinner finally came, I went, even though something deep inside my chest already knew that what waited for me on the other side of that door was not the simple forgiveness I had been praying for. The message came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of quiet Maine day where the sky is a dull gray and you hear more about other people's lives from television than from your own phone. And when I saw her name light up my screen after a full year of silence, I actually thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone before I managed to open it and read the words, "Dinner at 7. Just us. Let us talk." I must have read that little line 10 times, my chest feeling tight and hollow at the same time. Because there it was, everything I'd been begging for in my prayers and doubting in my mind. An invitation that sounded simple on the surface but carried the weight of every unsaid apology, every unanswered call, every birthday missed, and every night I sat awake, wondering if I should have fought harder or stayed quieter that last time we spoke. Part of me wanted to answer right away with a long message about how much she had hurt me, how deeply that word toxic had cut, how many times I had checked my phone on holidays and told myself to stop being foolish. But another part of me, the tired and hopeful part, knew that if I put all my hurt between us before I even saw her face, I might scare away the only chance I had to sit across from her again. So I simply wrote back that I would be there, and then stood in my small kitchen, staring at the clock on the wall, as if time itself might change its mind. I chose the blue blouse she had once praised, even though it was a little looser now around my shoulders. I brushed my hair more carefully than usual, put on the necklace she bought me years ago on a good day when we still laughed together in stores, and I pulled out the old recipe card for her favorite peach cobbler, the one she used to ask for on her birthdays, like it was a secret treasure only I could make. As the cobbler baked and filled my house with that warm, sugary smell, my mind kept flickering back to the letters and calls I had received over the past months. The ones I had tried to dismiss as mistakes, envelopes from banks I did not use, offers addressed to me with terms I did not recognize. A voice on the phone asking about accounts I never remembered opening. And I pushed those memories aside because I wanted so badly to walk into that evening with an open heart and not with suspicion. When I finally set the cobbler on a towel in the passenger seat and started the car, the sky outside was already beginning to darken. The kind of early evening that makes the world look softer from a distance. And as I drove toward her neighborhood, my hands tight on the wheel, I kept talking to myself under my breath. Telling myself to be calm, to listen, to forgive if I could, and to believe, just for one night, that my daughter's message meant what it said. I had no way of knowing that the hope I was carrying with that dish would soon be sitting beside me in the car, cooling between us, while I watched something unfold at her front door that would show me just how far the distance between us had really grown. When I turned into her neighborhood that evening, the houses looked the same as they always had. Neat lawns, warm windows, cars lined up along the curb. But everything in me felt different. My hands tight on the steering wheel, my heart bouncing between hope and fear. And by the time I pulled up in front of her place and stepped out with that cobbler in my arms, I remember thinking that if we could just sit across from each other and talk, maybe all the sharp words from a year ago would start to lose their sting. What happened at the door, I will never forget. the way a few hurried words and a shaken look changed the course of the night and sent me back down that walkway with my cheeks burning and my mind spinning. And so I did what I was told. I got into my car again, drove slowly to the corner, and parked where the trees and shadows hid me just enough that I could still see her front steps without being seen myself. Sitting there in the dim light of the dashboard, the smell of peach and cinnamon filling the small space around me, I felt older than I had ever felt in my life, not because of my years, but because of the weight of confusion pressing down on my chest as I stared at that house and tried to make sense of how a simple invitation to dinner had turned into a warning to disappear. I watched the curtains, the glow in the windows, the way the porch light washed over the steps, and I kept asking myself if I had misunderstood. If maybe I had overreacted, if I should have ignored everything and marched back up there like I used to when she was a teenager slamming doors. But every time that thought rose up, I saw again the fear in those eyes that told me to leave, and I knew that something beyond hurt feelings was moving inside those walls. Time in that car did not feel like minutes. It felt like a long hallway with no end. My fingers tapping the steering wheel, my mind walking back through every letter, every unexplained phone call from banks I did not know, every little detail that had felt wrong over the past months and that I had pushed aside because it was easier to believe in love than in the possibility that someone you raised could use your trust as a tool. I remember whispering to myself in that parked car, asking quietly for protection. Not just from whatever was about to happen, but from the part of me that still wanted to run up there and pretend everything was fine. And it was in the middle of that silent, heavy waiting that I saw headlights swing around the corner and a dark vehicle slow to a stop in front of her house. And something in my body went cold before my mind even caught up with what my eyes were seeing. The dark vehicle rolled to a slow stop in front of her house, and even from where I was parked, I could see the shine of the paint under the streetlights. Too clean and too official looking to belong to a neighbor dropping by for a friendly visit. And when the doors opened and two men stepped out, one in a suit holding a folder, and the other in a uniform with something small clipped at his belt, my breath caught in my throat in a way that made my chest ache. I watched them walk up the path I had just walked, confident, purposeful. The man in the suit glancing down at the papers like he already knew every step of what was supposed to happen next. And when the door opened, it was not a warm family scene I saw. It was my son-in-law standing there, checking his watch with that impatient little flick of his wrist. I remembered from dinners where he acted like any time spent with me was time taken from something more important. He greeted them in a way that made it obvious they were expected. No surprise, no confusion, only a tight little nod and a gesture to come inside. And I sat there gripping the steering wheel, feeling as if I had been pushed outside the glass of my own life, forced to watch something I was never meant to see. The minutes that followed stretched thin and sharp. I could not hear words, only the rise and fall of voices muffled by walls, the way shadows moved across the curtains, the glimpse once of my daughter's profile as she crossed the front hall, her hand pressed to her forehead like she had a headache. And I remember thinking that whatever this was, it was serious, it was planned, and it had nothing to do with a mother and daughter sharing a simple meal to make peace. I do not know how long I sat there before the door opened again, but when it did, the air around me seemed to freeze, because the two men came out first. That small box in the uniformed man's hand, now clearly visible. And then between them, my daughter stepped into the light, her hands pulled together in front of her, the glint of metal at her wrists catching the street lamp, tears streaking down her face as she stumbled on the last step. Behind her, Maria stood in the doorway, clutching a bag, calling out words I could not fully hear but could feel in my bones. Something about how she had told her not to do it, how she had warned her. And as I watched them guide my own flesh and blood into that vehicle and close the door behind her, it felt as if the entire story I thought I knew about my family had been yanked out from under me, leaving me sitting in that parked car with a cold cobbler and a heart that did not yet understand what crime had just walked out of that house in handcuffs. When the vehicle pulled away and the red lights disappeared around the corner, I stayed exactly where I was, hands still wrapped around the steering wheel, eyes burning, feeling like I had just watched someone tear the last page out of a book without letting me read it. And for a few minutes, all I could do was sit there and ask over and over in my head, "What did you do? What did they find? What have you gotten yourself into?" I could have driven home right then and pretended I had never come, pretended I had not seen my daughter led away like that. But my heart would not let me. It kept telling me that if I left without understanding, the questions would eat me alive. So I waited until the house was quiet again, until the lights inside grew softer and only one small lamp near the front door remained. I started the car and rolled slowly back up the street, my chest tight as I pulled to the curb a little way from her driveway. And that is when I saw Maria, sitting on the front step with her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking like someone who had run out of tears and was still trying to cry. I took a deep breath, picked up the cobbler dish, and walked toward her with legs that did not feel steady. And when she looked up and saw me, her eyes widened with shock and relief, as if she had been afraid I had simply vanished. I sat down beside her without saying anything at first, placed the cobbler between us on the step, and in that strange, quiet moment outside a house that no longer felt like family to me, I knew that whatever truth I was about to hear from her would hurt. But I also knew I could not turn away from it anymore. Maria was the first to speak. Her voice rough and tired, she said she was sorry, that she had tried to stop this, that she had begged my daughter to think about what she was doing. And I remember turning my face toward her, feeling older than my years, and asking very quietly, what did they do? What was all of this really about? She took a deep breath and told me that for months she had heard my daughter and her husband talking in low voices at the dining table after dinners, spreading out papers with my name on them, laughing about how easy it was to use my social security number and my clean record to open cards and accounts, because I never checked anything. Because I trusted them. Because I was too busy being grateful for the times they invited me over to question what they were asking me to sign. She said they had planned tonight carefully, that the men who arrived were not there by surprise. They were supposed to be there when I was sitting inside. They had prepared documents and a little story about how I was getting forgetful, how I needed help managing my affairs, and they were going to ask me to sign papers that would give them control over my credit, my accounts, and even, eventually, my house. As she spoke, every strange letter, every confusing call, every uneasy feeling I had pushed aside came rushing back into my mind like pieces of a puzzle I never realized I was holding. And I sat there on that step with the dish between us, realizing that the dinner I had thought might heal a wound had been nothing more than a trap, and that this quiet woman who scrubbed their floors was the only reason I had not walked straight into it with a smile on my face. That night, when I finally drove home with the cobbler still untouched on the seat beside me, my mind felt like it was walking through fog. Every word Maria had said circling around the same sharp point. They used your name, they used your trust, they planned to make you sign your life away. And I remember sitting at my small kitchen table in Maine, with my hands flat on the wood, just listening to the clock tick while the house pressed in around me with a silence that did not feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like it knew something about me had just cracked. I did not sleep much. I drifted in and out, seeing the image of my daughter being guided into that dark vehicle, hearing her voice from years ago promising she would take care of me when I was old. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw documents with my name twisted into something dangerous, as if my own identity had been turned into a weapon against me. Early the next morning, the phone rang, and when I answered, a calm voice on the other end introduced himself as someone from a financial crimes unit. He asked me to confirm my full name, my address, the last 4 digits of my social security number, and then he said words that made my hands go cold. He told me they had been investigating several accounts opened in my name that matched addresses and contacts connected to my daughter and her husband. that they had gathered evidence of fraudulent credit lines, loans, and purchases, and that the visit I had witnessed outside her house was the result of a warrant they had been building for months. He said they had tried to reach me before, letters that I now remembered tossing aside because I thought they were just confusing bank mail, calls I had cut short because I assumed they were scams. And as he spoke, I felt this deep, aching shame that I had been so eager to avoid trouble that I had walked right past the very people trying to protect me. When he asked if I had knowingly given permission for any of these accounts, if I had agreed to hand over control of my finances, my heart felt like it was breaking all over again. Because saying no out loud meant facing the truth that my own daughter had gone ahead anyway. And when I finally managed to whisper that I had never agreed to anything like that, he was quiet for a moment, then told me gently that my cooperation would help them close the case and start cleaning up the damage done in my name. I hung up the phone and sat there staring at the wall, realizing that the little girl I had once carried on my hip had grown into a woman who saw my trust and my good name as tools she could bend, and as painful as it was, I understood that what had been taken from me was not just credit. It was the last bit of innocence I had left about who she was willing to be. In the days that followed, I moved through my little house in Maine as if I were walking underwater, every movement slow, every thought carrying the weight of that phone call. But one morning, I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window and realized that if I did not stand up for myself now, there might not be anything left of me to protect later. So I put on a clean blouse, gathered every letter and statement I could find with my name on it, and went to see a lawyer in town who had helped a friend of mine after her husband passed. Sitting in that office, with sunlight falling across stacks of papers and framed certificates on the wall, I told my story from the beginning, my voice shaking at first, then growing steadier as I laid out the pieces, the unexplained mail, the pressure to sign things, the fight where I was called toxic, the year of silence, the dinner invitation that was really a trap, the arrest I watched from my car, and the call from the financial crimes unit that had finally forced the truth into the open. He listened without interrupting, asked careful questions, and then told me plainly that I had more power than I felt, that I could freeze my credit, challenge every fraudulent account, put legal protections in place so no one could ever again use my name without my knowledge, and that I could update my will to reflect not the daughter I wished I had, but the reality of the choices she had made. Hearing those words hurt, but they also made something inside me sit up straighter. And as we went through each document and he explained what could be done, I felt the first small taste of control return to me, like the ground beneath my feet was still there if I dared to look down and trust it. When I left his office with a folder in my hands and the beginnings of a new plan in place, I understood that I could not rewrite what my daughter had done, but I could make sure that the rest of my story would not be written by people who saw me only as a signature and a source of credit, instead of a woman who had worked too hard and loved too deeply to let her whole life be reduced to a line on a balance sheet. In the weeks after I sat in that lawyer's office, my life did not suddenly become easy, but it did become clearer. And little by little I began to live in that clarity instead of in the fog of confusion and guilt that had wrapped itself around me for so long. I froze my credit like he recommended. I called each company that had my name tangled up with charges I had never made. And with the help of the investigators and that patient man in the suit, we started untangling every knot my daughter and her husband had tied, one account at a time. There were long phone calls where I had to repeat that I had never agreed to any of it, long letters where I signed my name not as a quiet formality, but as a statement that I was still here, still of sound mind, still allowed to say no. And while all of that was exhausting, it also reminded me that my identity belonged to me, not to anyone who happened to know the right numbers and the right lies. During that time, messages began to come from my daughter through relatives and short calls from a number I did not recognize, sometimes begging, sometimes angry, saying she had made mistakes, blaming the pressure from her husband, saying that she was scared and that I was the only one who could really help her now. And every time I heard those words, my heart clenched, because there is a part of a mother that never stops wanting to rush in and save, even when she is the one who has been wounded. But I also knew that helping her did not mean handing back the very power she had tried to steal. So I chose a different kind of help. I spoke to her lawyer once and made it clear that I would tell the truth and not add to her punishment. But I would not lie for her. I would not pretend I had agreed to things I never did. And I would not undo the protections I had finally put around my life. In the quiet evenings, when the paperwork was put away and the house settled into its familiar creaks, I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about the people who had stepped forward when everything fell apart. The investigator who had kept reaching out, the lawyer who spoke to me with respect, and Maria, who had risked her job and her safety just to pull me back from a door I never should have crossed. And I began to understand that family is not only the people who share your blood. It is also the ones who stand between you and harm when they have nothing to gain by doing it. These days my life is quieter on the outside. Most mornings in Maine start the same way, with a simple breakfast and the sound of the kettle on the stove. But inside, I carry a different kind of strength than I had before. Not loud, not angry, just a steady knowing that I survived something that could have taken everything from me. Not only my savings and my credit, but my sense of who I was. I still think about my daughter. There are nights when I lie awake and remember her as a little girl running across the yard, and my chest aches with a grief I cannot fully put into words, because losing trust is a kind of loss that does not fit into a clean story. It sits beside you at the table, even when no one else is there. But I have learned that I am allowed to love her from a distance and still protect myself. Those two things can live in the same heart. I spend more time now with people who have proven their kindness in small, quiet ways. A neighbor who checks on me when it snows. A woman from church who brings over soup when she makes too much. And every so often I call Maria just to hear her voice and make sure she's doing all right. And when we talk, I thank her again. Because without her courage that night, I might have walked into a future I did not choose. If there is anything I want you to take from my story, it is this. You are not selfish for asking questions. You are not ungrateful for reading every line before you sign your name. You are not disloyal for saying no when something feels wrong. Your name, your mind, and your peace are not gifts you owe anyone in exchange for love. If you are listening to me and you have felt something turn in your stomach while someone you care about pushed papers in front of you, or told you that you were being difficult for wanting to understand, I hope my story gives you permission to pause, to ask for help, to remember that you are allowed to protect the life you worked so hard to build. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. It makes my heart feel a little less alone to know you sat here with me. And if you would like to hear more of my stories and walk through them together, I invite you to subscribe so we can meet again in the next one.